requested a meeting, stood at attention in her office with walls lined not with awards but handwritten notes from soldiers she'd mentored, and apologized, voice shaking, not because he'd been caught, but because he'd been changed. And she listened, nodded, and said growth is the only acceptable apology. And the final twist came months later at graduation, when that same recruit was awarded a leadership citation for intervention during a crisis he'd handled with humility and decisiveness. And as she pinned it on his uniform, she leaned in and said softly, "Remember this feeling." And he did, forever, because the story spread across the base, then across commands, not as a rumor but as a lesson, a reminder that mockery reveals more about the speaker than the target, that power often walks quietly, and that underestimating someone because of race or gender isn't just immoral, it's dangerous. And if this story made you uncomfortable, good, it should, because growth begins there. And if you want more stories that expose hard truths and deliver earned justice, subscribe now, because silence isn't always weakness, and respect, once lost, is never easily reclaimed. Stop scrolling. This story will flip your stomach, then flip your heart, and by the end you'll understand why respect is earned in silence and revealed in thunder. So if you want true stories that expose arrogance, power, and justice inside systems you think you understand, hit subscribe right now and stay with me, because what you're about to hear happened on an American base where laughter became regret and ignorance met authority in the most brutal way possible. And it all began on a scorching morning when a group of freshly arrived male recruits, loud with confidence and empty with wisdom, stood near the motor pool joking about everything and nothing, bored and looking for a target. And that's when they saw her, a black woman in plain fatigues, no visible rank, hair pulled tight, boots dusty like everyone else's, walking alone with a clipboard. And one of them snorted and said she looked lost. Another mimicked her walk. Another muttered a racist comparison meant to amuse his friends, and the group erupted in laughter that echoed against steel walls, never noticing that seasoned soldiers nearby suddenly went quiet, never noticing that radios went still, never noticing that a sergeant across the yard froze mid-step like he'd seen a ghost, because the woman they were mocking didn't flinch, didn't speed up, didn't glare back. She just stopped, slowly turned, and looked at them with a calm so heavy it felt like pressure in the air, the kind of calm that comes from certainty, not fear. And she asked them one simple question in a measured voice: "Who's your unit lead?" And the recruits laughed harder, one saying she had no authority to ask, another telling her to move along. And she nodded once, wrote something on her clipboard, and walked away, leaving behind jokes that felt slightly less funny, but were quickly brushed off as the group went back to bragging about why they joined, how tough they were, how nobody could tell them what to do, completely unaware that the base had just shifted beneath their feet, because the woman they'd mocked wasn't lost, wasn't low-ranking, and wasn't there by accident. She was Colonel Amara Hayes, the newly appointed base commander, hand-picked after overseeing 3 overseas operations that rewrote training doctrine. A woman whose leadership style was so quiet and precise that people often mistook her for background until it was too late. And her arrival had been intentionally understated to assess morale and discipline without ceremony, a test the recruits had already failed. But the real twist came hours later when alarms sounded and all personnel were ordered to assemble in full formation on the parade ground, confusion buzzing through ranks as officers whispered and NCOs barked orders with unusual urgency. The same recruits now sweating under the sun, still joking until they saw the command staff assemble and then saw her step onto the platform. Same fatigues, same boots, but now flanked by flags and senior officers snapping to attention, and silence fell like a dropped blade as someone near the front gasped and another recruit's face drained of color, recognition crashing through them one by one. And when she spoke, her voice carried without a microphone, steady, controlled, devastating, as she introduced herself, not with bravado, but with facts. Years of service, missions led, lives saved, failures owned. And then she paused and said, this base would be judged not by strength, but by discipline, not by volume, but by respect. And that morning she had witnessed a failure of all 3, and without naming names, she described the incident in detail, every word precise, every pause intentional, and the recruits felt like the ground was opening beneath them because everyone knew, and she looked directly at them, not with anger, but with disappointment, sharper than rage, and announced that effective immediately, the base would enter an intensive leadership and conduct audit. Schedules rewritten, privileges revoked, units reassigned, and those responsible for conduct unbecoming would face consequences not to punish, but to correct. Because the military, she said, does not break people down to humiliate them, but to build them into something worthy of trust. And the days that followed were relentless. The recruits singled out not by shouting, but by scrutiny. Given the hardest details, the longest nights, the most unforgiving evaluations, their mistakes documented, their excuses ignored, until arrogance gave way to exhaustion and then to reflection. And one by one, they began to understand that the woman they mocked had chosen not to destroy them in that moment, because true authority doesn't need applause or cruelty. It needs results. And weeks later, one of those recruits, now quieter, sharper,